Carnahan. See the radio simulcast here on C-SPAN. Here's a look at what's coming up. In a moment, today's meeting of the National Transportation Safety Board on their results of the ValuJet crash investigation. After that, we continue with our visit north of the border as we discuss the similarities and differences between the U.S. and Canada. Then at 2 a.m., Education Secretary Richard Riley and others discuss a national voluntary test initiative. Today, the National Transportation Safety Board met to announce the results of their investigation of the ValuJet crash. In May of 1996, ValuJet Flight 592 crashed shortly after its takeoff from Miami International Airport. All 110 passengers aboard the plane were killed. For the last year, the NTSB has been looking into possible causes of the accident. Today, members discussed and voted on their final report. This portion of the meeting lasts about 4 hours.
We will reconvene this meeting of the National Transportation Safety Board. We're in the process of discussing the ValuJet accident that occurred in the Everglades near Miami, Florida on May 11th, 1996. We are beginning the discussion of our third safety issue that was identified by staff for presentation, the guidance for the handling of chemical oxygen generators.
Kurt Anderson.
So could I please again ask for order here? If you have conversations, please take them out into the hall. Okay, Mr. Fight, who is proceeding with the presentation of Safety Issue 3?
Kurt Anderson will handle that.
Mr. Anderson, please proceed.
The guidance for handling the removed oxygen generators was provided by the ValuJet routine work card, the ValuJet MD-80 maintenance manual, and the in-house practices at Sabertech at the time the generators were removed and stored at the facility. The routine work card clearly called for the installation of a safety cap on all unexpended generators to protect the percussion cap from being activated by an impact of the firing hammer. And the card also called for the firing pin to stay in place to act as a safety restraint for the firing hammer. And it called for the firing pin lanyard to be coiled around the body of the generator and then secured. Both the routine work card and the maintenance manual contained warnings about the extreme heat produced by the activated generators. However, the work card did not require an inspector's signature to validate the correct performance of each individual step on the card. And because there was no inspection requirement, opportunities were missed to discover the fact that the safety caps had not been installed.
Make that statement again.
I said, however, the work card did not require an inspector's signature to validate the correct performance of each individual step.
Right.
Because there was no inspection requirement of those individual steps, there were opportunities missed to discover the fact that the safety caps had not been installed.
Thank you.
In addition, the work card itself did not call for the generators to be discharged prior to disposal, nor did it identify the generators as hazardous materials. Also, the instruction section of the work card did not directly reference the one chapter in the maintenance manual that discussed the storage, discharge, and disposal of generators. Furthermore, the generators that were removed from the ND-80 did not contain warnings that would have identified them as oxidizers, hazardous material, or producers of heat. In addition, Sabertech's Miami facility did not have an effect at the time the generators were taken into the shipping and receiving hold area, a system that ensured that the mechanics who brought them into that area would identify the contents of the boxes or note that they were hazardous materials. In this specific case, there was no clear evidence of communication between the individuals who brought the boxes into the shipping and receiving area and the individuals that worked in that area. I'll take questions at this time.
Well, I'm going to defer my questions so that the other members, I won't be first every time. Vice Chairman. Or member.
Go ahead.
Member Hammersmith.
A couple of questions from reading these sections of the report. We state on page 30 that at the top of the page, according to this mechanic, and we make reference to the mechanic who signed off on routine work card 0069, there was a great deal of pressure to complete the work on the airplanes on time, and the mechanics had been working 12-hour shifts 7 days per week. He said that on the morning of May 4, 1996, 5 days before the date N802 VV departed Sabertech, one of the Sabertech supervisors assigned him the task of signing off work card 0069 for N802 VV. Would staff want to elaborate on what is expressed in that factual information in terms of the work shift factors involved with the mechanics doing this work, as well as the assignment of signing off on that work card? Would you want to just elaborate on that and help us understand those issues better?
I think you mentioned a couple of issues there. One, as far as the perceived pressure that may have come about at that time, as the three MD-80s neared the time where they were supposed to be returned to ValuJet, there was, according to a number of individuals that were interviewed, an increased sense of pressure to increase the pace of the work. And during our investigation, we came across a memorandum that was published at Sabertech on April 26, 1996. It states the following. It said, effective immediately, due to the present workload, all maintenance personnel, including management, are required to work 7 days, including days off. We will return to regular schedule when the three MD-80s are delivered. We interviewed a number of mechanics that, in addition to just this memo, perceived the fact that there was a significant amount of pressure to make sure that these things went out on time. That's not an unusual situation at a repair station.
Plus, there was also a financial penalty if these airplanes didn't go out on time either. And we found that through testimony at our public hearing.
All right. And on the second area that I raised, in terms of assigning this mechanic the task of signing off work card 0069, was the sign-off on that card completely voluntary and in compliance with what the mechanic thought he had done, or was there any type of subtle pressure to do that?
Well, there's two things there. I think we have to realize that this task, this routine work card that called for this task to be completed, extended over an approximate 2-month period. There were numerous individuals that participated in the accomplishment of the exchange of these generators. And as they came down to the final days, they got to a point where they needed to clear a number of work cards. And there was one morning where in the booth, which is a paperwork control area in the hangar floor, there was one morning where there were supervisory individuals in that booth attempting to find individuals that would be willing to take certain work cards out and ensure that the process had been carried out, and then make sure that these work cards were signed off. During our initial interviews, the mechanics that signed off these 2 work cards, because there were 2 aircraft, during our initial interviews, they did not mention any feeling that anyone had applied any pressure for them to sign anything off that had not been completed, or that there was any sense that their jobs were in jeopardy. But in some statements that we received from them approximately 2 months after our initial interviews, they made comments that although they had not directly been threatened, they had heard rumors that individuals who would not participate in signing off these cards, that their jobs may be in jeopardy.
Okay, but this particular mechanic did understand that the complete handling of that work card 0069 involved attaching safety caps.
Yes, that's correct. Both of the mechanics that signed off the card for 802 Victor Victor, the mechanic that signed off the card for 803 Victor Victor, during the interview process expressed the fact that they understood that the safety caps were required on the canister by the work card.
Did they use the term canister or generator? Do you recall?
I do not recall at this time. Actually, at the very beginning of the investigation, in the maintenance hangar as we were doing interviews, those two terms were used interchangeably quite often. I did look at some of the green tags, what we call the repairable tags that they had put on the generators, and the ones that I did see were annotated with the term generator, and the work card itself does say generator.
Thank you. I have just a couple of other questions out of the analysis section. On page 206, beginning at line 4, we say, therefore, the Safety Board believes that the FAA should require aircraft manufacturers to affix a warning label to chemical oxygen generators to effectively communicate the dangers posed by unexpended generators and to communicate that unexpended generators are hazardous materials. And my question is, why do we believe that the FAA should require aircraft manufacturers to be the ones to accomplish that?
Yes, we discussed that about 2 days ago, and we will be changing the report to address that. It would be more correct to have the oxygen generator manufacturer ensure that the hazardous emblems are on those.
If you just,
go ahead.
if you simply remove the word aircraft, that it's basically an editing. It's a typo. It shouldn't.
Okay.
The word aircraft should not have been in there the first time on line 4 at the end of line 4.
Right.
And it should have read just to require manufacturers to fix the label.
Dr. Loeb, we appreciate the fact that you've come in ill today, but we need to have you speak closer to the microphone.
Yes, sir, we'll do that.
Let's see. And one other somewhat minor point. We say also on that page, beginning at line 11, we say, therefore, the Safety Board believes that the FAA should require all air carriers to develop and implement programs to ensure that other aircraft components that are hazardous are properly identified and that effective procedures are established to safely handle those components after they are removed from aircraft. When I say minor point, I was just wondering if staff could provide a couple of examples of what other hazardous components would be involved in that process.
I think either Ben or Mr. Henderson would be able to address that.
Just some examples.
Some examples of other aircraft components that might be considered hazardous?
Right. We ask the FAA to require all air carriers to develop and implement programs to ensure that other aircraft components that are hazardous are properly identified and that effective procedures are implemented. So what are some other aircraft components that we're making reference to?
Certainly. Yes, the oxygen bottles, which are actually compressed gas cylinders that are used by the pilot and crew, would be a hazardous material, as well as aircraft batteries that function or operate the engines. Well, there's fire extinguishers for the aircraft engines that operate with halon or the use of halon. Those also would be in aircraft hazardous materials. There's a number of units. On airplanes themselves, they have a problem with magnetic devices, and certain of the devices that are carried on airplanes or that are used on airplanes have magnetic devices within them. So they'd have to be, I believe, one of the radar units, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, is considered a hazardous material for air transportation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Henderson. Any others from staff? Mr. Howder?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple others I can think of. There's squib charges used to deploy slides and things. On some aircraft, they have spent uranium counterweights, which are hazardous, have to be controlled.
Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Member Golio.
Yes, sir. Mr. Anderson, you mentioned a moment ago about the job card and inspection and validation. And just the way you said it raised my attention. Because in the air carrier environment, when an inspector is called over, it is at a critical step. So he would not, unless the card was so written, ensure that every step was complied with. It is often to find a job card that has steps 1 through however many, and at step 5, you would call an inspector over, and he would look at the critical step. He would not look at the previous steps. So we need to be careful in how we choose our words here, because having that card, an RII item, would not automatically ensure that every step was complied with.
Yes, I concur with that. And on this particular card, they're step B, and I think it might be of value to an Appendix D.
Well, we've had all this conversation here about a work card. Somebody throw one up on the screen and tell us what one is, so we can all understand what a work card is.
We have one in Appendix D, and then we also have a copy of one that's going to come up on the screen here.
I assume a work card is something that somebody's doing the work looks at to do the work, right?
That's correct. If we can focus in on step B right over here, or just focus, there we go, in on the card. You'll see right here, that's good enough. Back up just a little, please. Right there. It says that if the generator has not been expended, install the shipping cap on the firing pin. Now, if you'll back it on out so that we can see the whole card. And what Member Golia is addressing is the fact that over here on the right-hand side, we have a column for the mechanic's signature, and right up here, that's what that would say, is the mechanic's signature. And then he would be expected to sign off each one of these steps. In this case, there is no requirement for an inspector's signature. Normally what you would see when there was a requirement for an inspector's signature is that this column over here would be split in half. On the left-hand side, you'd have the mechanic's signature. On the right-hand side, you would have the inspector's signature. And Member Golia is emphasizing the fact that what we really need to do is make sure that there is a required inspector's signature for that specific step, step B, which is the requirement of the installation of the cap.
You mentioned, Mr. Anderson, in your verbalization, that the mechanics, this mechanic on page 30, signed off all the paperwork. Now, there is an FAR requirement that mechanics sign for the work that they accomplish. Can you articulate for us or explain for us why that wasn't done? There was more than am I correct in assuming, or am my memory correct, that there was more than one mechanic that worked on both the removal and the installation of the oxygen generators?
Yes, that's correct. There were a number of individuals, and we're looking for those numbers right now in the report. We do have that. It says specifically how many worked on that car. But yes, there were a number of individuals, a high number of individuals that worked on that task over a period of about 2 months. And the system in SaberTech is such that the individual ID badge is punched into a barcode reader, and they're able to make a printout that can show us how many individuals worked on that task and when they worked on it and how many hours.
But they can't tell you specifically which oxygen generators were replaced by a given individual, or can they?
I'm sorry.
Well, why don't we answer the previous question since I just gave it to you?
Yeah, we have a footnote on page 28. It says that there were 72 different individuals that logged approximately 910 hours against the work tasks on 009. That would be on all 3 aircraft that were there at that time.
"72 people, so I understand. 72 people worked on this project, taking these generators off these 3 airplanes, and expended 910 hours to do that?"
Well, that's correct, but that's the entire process involved much more than just taking out the canisters and putting in new canisters. And there was an attempt to reconfigure both of the aircraft so that the left side of the aircraft would have 3-person generators on it, and the right side was going to have 4-person generators in position. And because not all the parts came in to complete the 4-person setup on the right-hand side, they completed a 3-person setup on both sides on one of the aircraft, and it got very convoluted, so they had to set up, they took it back out a second time. So there was a lot of people, a lot of different steps repeated. That's why there were so many hours and so many different individuals.
Just to emphasize Kurt's point, here is the PSU, or the passenger service unit, which the oxygen generator fits in. This is a 4-person setup. The oxygen generator is cradled inside here, so it's not a matter of just handling the oxygen generator, it's a matter of handling the unit itself, pulling it out of the overhead, so they're labor intensive.
It's not a simple task.
It's a task that has many steps to it, and the parts had to come out, and then they had to wait for some additional parts to come in. They had to do some inspections and then reinsert and so forth. And that
Something between simple and rocket science, but it took 910 hours to do all of them, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm even more concerned after reading that footnote, and I missed that the first time around. 72 people performed maintenance on this airplane, and we do not have a record. There's no record in ValuJet's or Sabertech's system to indicate what mechanics accomplished what tasks.
Yes, there is. The barcode reader would be punched in by these individuals, and I need to clarify the fact that not all of those hours were specifically against this work card task, that there were other tasks involved with the oxygen system. We are able to go back. We have those records with us. It shows the ID number of each individual, the task that they worked on, and the number of hours they spent upon that task.
So if I asked you to tell me who accomplished step 5, and you've pulled the card down, so I can't tell if that's really a good one to pick, but could you tell me who accomplished a given step on job card 0069?
No, we could not.
That's the question. Now, the FARs require maintenance personnel to sign for the work that they accomplish. Are you telling me that in this facility, the individuals did not sign for the work that they accomplished?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, this adds an additional burden to that signature at the bottom of the page, because under FAR 65, there are provisions for you to have uncertificated mechanics or others can accomplish any task on an airplane. However, the person signing for the work is now required to ensure that that work was accomplished in accordance with all the manual provisions. That is a larger burden than an RII burden in a maintenance operation. Now, what you're telling me is that that individual who signed that card has assured everybody in the world, based upon his certificate, that that work was accomplished in accordance with the manual provisions, including the installing of the caps, and that holds him totally and fully responsible.
His signature would indicate that, yes.
Okay. That is a lot different than just signing off a job card. You know, we have falsifications issues here, which I'm very surprised that the FAA didn't pursue. But falsification of job cards, when they signed off for the accomplishment of installing those caps, And this burden, this person who signed for that assumed an even greater burden. It's just,
I would concur with that.
since there were so many people involved in this task, turnover becomes an issue. How, in a long period of time, longer than I originally expected, based upon what you had just said here, how was control maintained of this job cut? First off, what are the Sabertech procedures for shift turnover? What is in their manual?
I would have to look back in their inspection procedure manual. I do not remember reading any shift turnover procedures in the manual, but it may be there. I'd have to research that further. But we did interview the individuals that were involved in performing the task on 0069. And there were a number of different ways that shift turnover was accomplished. And
A number of different ways?
yes, that's correct. Some individuals said that they were briefed by a supervisor. Other individuals said that they went over and that the mechanics that were performing the task, when they came on to their shift, they would go over to that mechanic or that group of mechanics and be instructed as to what those people were doing, and then they would follow that process. Other individuals told us that they directly referenced either the work card or thought they might have referenced the maintenance manual. They couldn't remember. So there was a number of different ways that the shift changeover took place.
Did that pique your interest at all as
Yes.
being unusual and abnormal?
That's, yes, that is unusual.
Why didn't we put this in the report? Mr. Wolbert?
We will address.
I think we need to.
Yeah, we'll add some material on this and refer back to the Eagle Lake, Texas accident and in which we did address the shift turnover issue.
And this is, 72 people, 72 different opinions, 72 different voice turnovers. People don't always say what they think. People don't always hear what other people say. That's not the way to go. I'd be very surprised if the FAA approved the manuals for either ValuJet or Sabertech to allow that to be the sole means of turnover. This is a we need to address it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. At the Miami facility for Sabertech, we have mentioned in here that ValuJet had one full-time employee, ValuJet employee on the property, and they had some contract employees supplementing his duties. Is that full-time ValuJet employee under the quality assurance umbrella? Did he report to the quality assurance up the chain?
He was all three of those individuals, including the ValuJet employee, was a technical representative. They were not, strictly speaking, quality assurance inspectors. ValuJet did not assign, at that time, quality assurance inspectors to their heavy maintenance contract facilities.
So there was no representative of the quality assurance department?
There was no full-time representative. There was one QA inspector that arrived about 2 weeks prior to the end of or to the time when the aircraft were going to go back to ValuJet to look over the package and so forth. But the normal QA surveillance type inspection of individual tasks that you would be accustomed to, no, that was not present. There were some spot checks done of task by one of these technical representatives.
Now, but he was not quality.
That's correct.
You mentioned to look over the package. The quality assurance representative showed up approximately 2 weeks prior to this, and to look over the package. Could you delineate what looked over means? Did they delineate that to you?
Not in great detail. It was simply to look over the work cards to make sure that everything had been completed, everything had been signed off, that it had been done according to the manner that ValuJet had expected.
Wait a minute.
But
now, if you're conducting a paperwork review, in some cases, a considerable amount of time after the work was accomplished, how do you ensure that that work was accomplished in accordance with any of the manual provisions or the manufacturer's manual provisions or the ValuJet manual? If the work's already been done and all you have in front of you is a piece of paper, how can you ensure that that work was done in accordance with any of the provisions?
You cannot.
Thank you. What was the training? First, before we get to the training, what is the job description of these technical representatives for ValuJet? Would you share that with the
Yeah, essentially the technical representatives are more of a
John, I have no objection to us getting into this, but I think I need to point out that we're really getting into the discussion of issue items 4 and 5, which is SaberTech and ValuJet's procedures for handling company materials and hazardous materials, and ValuJet's oversight of its contract heavy maintenance facilities. So it might be good just to compress all 3 of those in this discussion. Please proceed. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Mr. Anderson, but we're kind of getting into other issue agenda items, and I have no objection to that, but I want to make note of it.
Essentially, the technical representatives were more of, you might say, contract consultants or individuals that would make sure that the tasks that were being performed were the tasks that ValuJet wanted to have performed, and that SaberTech was not performing tasks that ValuJet didn't want to have performed. And then also they were making sure that they were done, that they were using the correct work cards, the correct manuals. They were making sure that things were done on time. They were addressing any problems that may come up as far as coordination. We do have on the bottom of page 31 the beginning of the description, 31 and 32 descriptions of their responsibilities. But I think the important point to make here is that they were not assigned to that facility as QA inspectors. They were assigned to that facility as technical representatives. That's quality assurance inspectors.
And what was the training provided by ValuJet for this? First, for their employee, and then second, for the contractors?
We were told during our interviews that there was no specific training provided. They were interviewed by individuals at ValuJet about their background, and there was some discussions about what was expected of them. There was individual contracts that were signed that told them what their responsibilities were.
For the contract employees?
For the contract employees. But there was not, at the time that they went down there, a specific training process.
And were they given any form of detailed instructions to what their job would be? This is the contract employees now. What would be expected of them while they're, what they should be looking for?
They did have contracts that explained what they were responsible for. And as we interviewed them, each one delineated to us the specific areas that they were responsible for while they were at that facility.
And did any of them believe that they were responsible for quality in any way?
There was one individual, the employee of ValuJet, who made occasional spot checks of individual task accomplishment. We don't know how often that took place, but he did say that that was part of what he did, so he made occasional spot checks. But he was not a QA inspector who was going around signing off as an inspector.
And I noticed in the report it said that all 3 of these individuals worked day shift. Is that correct?
Well, they were basically, yes, but there were some situations where some specific issues came up or some specific problems, and those individuals then, if necessary, would stay into the night shift to work with those problems.
And this shift is a 7-day, 24-hour-a-day operation?
Well, it was near the end, yes.
So we have, make sure I'm clear in my mind, we have 3 individuals there that are called technical representatives, and I'm not fully clear in my mind what their duties were, but they certainly were not emphasizing quality. They mostly worked day shift in an operation that ran round the clock 7 days a week.
That would be
So
correct.
so they really have a good handle on what's going on in that facility. First-hand knowledge of what's going on, don't they?
Well, they're not present for much of what's taking place.
Okay.
I wouldn't go any further. Let it go. Because, I mean, he's a lot more.
Okay. Can I draw your attention, please, to page 140? In there, we talk about the avionics shop in this facility. And that only one person in that shop was certified. Can you explain why we believe that's significant?
It's significant because the shop operated in 3 shifts, and this individual, the certified individual, was present during the day shift. FAR 145-39 requires that each supervisor has to be in direct supervision over his work groups. So we question how that can take place if he's only there during 1 shift.
And was he signing for all the work that was accomplished there?
That's correct.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I will defer to Member Black for some questions, but I have additional ones.
Yeah, Member Goley has a number of questions in this area, and, but we'll move to Member Black now and the other members, and then come back to Member Goley.
Thank you. I think many of mine have already been handled here, but I think here on page 106 it indicates that there were a total of 587 persons who logged time on these 3 MD-80s. Did I copy that down right?
That's correct.
And ValuJet had these 3 technical reps were, I mean, they had to cover all 3 aircraft, is that correct?
That's correct, although one of them spent more time, the employee spent more time down actually with the aircraft. The other technical reps spent more of their time coordinating timelines and expenses and making sure that the right tasks were being accomplished. You know, I need to reiterate that these were not quality assurance inspectors inspecting the individual tasks that were being done. They're more managing the project.
Were these people A&Ps? Did they have a license? Were they licensed?
Yes, they were.
All 3 of them. I guess I had some control or some questions about the control, Sabertech's control over these contractors. It looks like that the numbers run that at least half of their workforce at any one given time were subcontractors to them, I guess on an as-needed basis. Is that correct?
That's correct. We took data from 3 separate months throughout the year prior to the accident, and in each case it was approximately 75% of the Sabertech workers or maintenance personnel were contract to Sabertech.
You have a footnote 76 in the same general area that says, according to FAR Part 145, the only individuals at a repair station who are required to be certified as a mechanic or a repairman are those directly in charge of maintenance functions of a repair station. The abilities of uncertified workers are determined by the officials of the station on a basis of practical tests or employment records. Is it possible for someone to monitor the capabilities of 587 people working on 3 different aircraft over this period of time? I guess what I'm getting at is, I hope you see it, this seems like an almost insurmountable task, and I think this is what John is alluding to, is you have legions of people passing through this place, this facility. You don't know who they are because you don't know their qualifications. You're depending on someone to certify them. Is that acceptable? Is that industry practice to have this amount of revolving door technician practice?
I would say that it makes me feel uncomfortable, and prior to the accident, it was Sabertech's practice that they would go to these companies that provided contract employees, and they would give a description of the individual that they needed to these companies and what certification, if any, they needed, or what qualification or experience those people needed. And then those contract providers then would provide these individuals to Sabertech. According to Sabertech, soon after the accident, that policy changed so that Sabertech would actually review their qualifications prior to bringing them into the facility.
Well, that's kind of hindsight, but I guess what I'm wondering, I'm especially concerned the certificated people are bad enough, but the people who do not have certificates, where you have to have this assurance of what their job capability is, it seems like that would almost be an insurmountable task if you had people that didn't even have the FAA certification as a mechanic to come in to know what they were capable of doing. Then add to what John's saying is having one person signing off on a work card that it had been accomplished by 70-something people over a period of several weeks. The system seems to break down somewhere. Maybe I'm missing something, or am I?
No, I would agree with that.
That's all I have.
Well, let me see if I can understand two or three things here, Mr. Anderson. The work card was signed and the safety caps weren't put on, right?
This is correct.
So I think, remember, and there's nothing on that card that said this was a hazardous material. There was nothing on the generator that said it was a hazardous material.
That's correct. On the card and the generator, it did not.
And if I understand it, what we have here is looking at this new phenomena we have in America of contract employees and contracting out work. We have ValuJet operating some 52 DC-9s, contracts out all of its heavy maintenance, and some of this work then goes to Sabertech, which was previously Dynatech, I think, down in Miami.
Dynair.
Dynair. And there were 3 individuals that were technical representatives of ValuJet that were supposed to be looking at not quality insurance, but technical representatives are going to try and be sure the work's done on time. Is that correct?
That's basically
And of
correct.
those 3 people, 2 of those are contract employees, right?
That's correct.
And then we get down to Sabertech, and 75% of the employees at Sabertech are contract employees. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And how many people are responsible for quality assurance to be sure that there isn't a slip between ValuJet, one contract, another contract, another contract, and another contract? Did we find anybody that's job description was quality assurance?
Yes, Sabertech themselves have quality assurance inspectors that sign off on the buyback of the task. That is done, in this case, at the completion of the task. I totally agree with you. The big problem is that we didn't have quality assurance representation from ValuJet. That policy, according to ValuJet, after the accident has been changed, and they now will have quality assurance inspectors at all facilities that are performing heavy maintenance on their aircraft.
To what level did they share with you? To what level? One person there, or one person per shift?
On the new policy?
Yes.
I would have to research that further.
Well, very well. I'll move on to that. I think gives me a better understanding of the situation. Vice Chairman.
The quality assurance by Sabertech now, I think I just sort of missed that here. We understand that ValuJet had the 3 people. How did Sabertech's quality assurance of the 70% contract plus the 30% of their own people? The 30% were Sabertech employees?
That's correct. 25% or so were Sabertech employees, and they have a number of individuals that are quality assurance inspectors, and when the task is completed, there's another card besides this routine work card. There's a non-routine work card, which I think most people would kind of look at as kind of a work order. It just gives a general description, like remove the oxygen generators and replace them. And when the task is completed, that card is signed off by an inspector, which is, by its very nature, that signature saying that the task has been completed and has been inspected as completed.
And so this is a SaberTech A&P mechanic
That's correct.
who is a
That's
quality
correct.
assurance person.
But it is not saying that he has been there to observe each individual task.
But he signed off on this work.
That QA inspector would sign off that that task is completed on the other card, the non-routine
Did you
card.
ask, or was it brought out in any of this, whether they looked at any of the actual generators that had been removed?
No, not that had been removed. They looked at the work that had been performed on the aircraft as far as the removal of the canisters, the generators, and the reinstallation of the new generators, and the testing of the mask and so forth.
Focus was on the new work was done, and not so much on what had been taken off.
Correct.
Right. It was on the airplane work, the airplane itself, and they simply weren't really looking at this aspect of it, and that is, you pull something off, what do you do with it after that?
Member Hammersmith?
Right. Going back to one of George Black's questions, which I'm not clear that I heard a good answer to. When you have this type of configuration of contractors and subcontractors, as we are seeing in ValuJet and SaberTech's operation, is this in any way typical of what goes on elsewhere in the commercial aviation system, or could this be described as industry practice?
Let me just start that we have to make sure that we clarify industry. The fact is, you're not going to typically see this in an airline operation that does in-house maintenance. You're going to see it more in the 145 repair facilities, where it's more common practice.
I couldn't hear you, Mr. Fife.
You're going to see it more in a 145 repair facility, where a lot of this work is contracted out to,
Okay.
and that the contractor itself will thus contract out. You wouldn't typically see this by an air carrier that has in-house maintenance, not to the extent that you do at a 145 repair facility.
Well, then, how many major air carriers, Part 121 operators that carry passengers, outsource their major maintenance?
I think it's important to understand that primarily where we're going to see this is in the new operators that have not had a chance to develop the ability to perform all their own heavy maintenance. But at the same time, there are major 121 operators that find it necessary, because maintenance can be cyclic. Yeah. They find it necessary at certain times to contract out certain heavy maintenance. And I'm familiar with one operator that right at this time is having a C-check performed by a contract facility. And they normally don't do that. They normally try to take care of it in-house, but when things start piling up. So, and also the whole process of contracting out, both in maintenance and in many areas, is kind of the new, it's the future, it's the new phenomenon.
And let me just clarify one thing. In giving you my characterization that major airlines don't typically do that, it's the heavy maintenance I was referring to. They do contract out. A lot of the major airlines do contract out maintenance at non-hub stations. In case an airplane breaks down at a non-hub, they're going to contract out for the maintenance services. But we were referring to heavy maintenance, and I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Okay, good clarification. A couple other questions.
Okay, John, can I ask, just, I mean, there are also major sort of 121 operators that routinely contract out, engine work, or
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think this is not just a cyclical. There's some more and more that do this as a matter of.
Fewer of them and fewer of them do their own engine work. Engine work can be done by the carrier in-house, or it may be contracted out. And in fact, they do contract out certain portions of their heavy maintenance at times, because there's specific reasons to do it, either the location of the airplane.
And that begs the question, who has the responsibility if they contract that work out for that work?
The carrier is obviously responsible for the safety of its airplanes operationally and maintenance as well. They can contract out the labor, They cannot contract out their responsibility for the safety of the airplane.